I haven't heard anything mentioned about population, which of course is a huge determinant of how much we're going to use and how much we need. And I haven't heard fracking mentioned either. I'd be curious to hear if you have anything to say about those two items.
That's those two. We got a long line. Let's try to get to fracking and population. Laurent?
Well, population, I'll tell you about my son, my older son. 2 weeks ago, he had to make a math project. And we've produced a site that we call Growing Blue, growingblue.com, and Jason is supporting us, where we gather a lot of data about water, because the vision was, again, lack of transparency. You need to make data and best practices basically available to people. So I advise him to look at two things: the water withdrawal per state in the US, but also the dynamic for population growth. And he came to some calculation then to look at how many years is there left, for instance, for California, in terms of hitting the level of unsustainable situation, which is more or less 40% of use of the available water resource. And his calculation shows that you've got 24 years in California if you don't change some of your practices. It was a rough one, but that's an interesting one.
And on fracking, Jason?
Before you leave the population one, just 2 bits of information that I find very interesting. Recently, I think you just pointed out earlier, Laurent, that slightly over half of the world's population now lives in cities. Yep. I'm also told that currently half of the world's population lives in countries with declining population replacement even, half. And I think those are probably related. That the asset that children represented in the rural, the agrarian society changes, frankly, to some extent to a deficit when families move to a city. So this concept that, yeah, it's just going to go on forever, I found that very interesting. So I'm not sure I'm one of these people who thinks we're just going to have more and more and more people forever.
The question, the challenge for population is that it's not only about the number of people. We've got 7 billion people on the planet today. That will be 9 in a few decades. But we've got also 1 billion of middle-class people, and that will be 3 in the next few decades. So their diet, the way they consume, and so the need for water in that respect is actually the main challenge, rather than just the number of people.
That was what I was going to answer the question as well. This new emerging middle class from India and China have more implications for water consumption through their diets and their meat-based diets than the double-digit population growth that you see in Africa. So I think it's not a strict number calculation on population. But let me try to actually also use this as the opening to the fracking question. One of the interesting developments that's coming in the lead up to Rio Plus 20, which is this 20-year anniversary of the World Summit on the Environment, is being pushed by the German government. And it's around the nexus between energy and water and food. Because ultimately, these things are very intricately interconnected, and they're not managed well in that way. So an example is energy policy in the US and the current separation between energy-related decisions and the water-related implications. Biofuels is a great example, but fracking another one where these two come together. And the push here is to get a more integrated approach to the way that countries try to develop policy to tackle these. I will go back to the China example and the melting glaciers, where I started. In and of itself, the idea that those glaciers are melting and over the next 30 years they would be not providing summer flows in those main rivers, that would be in and of itself a challenge. But if you look at China's long-term energy forecasts, they're planning to increase hydroelectric power by 40% over that same period. Think about that. Those are policies that are not speaking to each other, because if you're going to develop dams on rivers that aren't going to have summer flows, there's a problem there. But right now, the policy is disconnected, and I think this next 10 years is going to be about much more sophisticated interlinkages between food and energy and water policy.